Welcome to Foresight U. Today's topic is the secret to solving the challenges ahead, a conversation about creative thinking at work. I'm Sarah Thurber. I'm the managing partner at Foresight. I'll be your host alongside my colleague Russ Schoen. Russ, will you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Russ Schoen, facilitation lead here at Foresight. I'll be monitoring the Q&A and sharing questions with Sarah and our guest as appropriate.
Okay, thanks. Um, so Foresight U, for those of you who have not been here, it's usually a free monthly webinar exclusively for our Foresight certified facilitators. This is where we teach and learn best practices for how to help teams in organizations tackle really tough challenges using creative thinking and collaborative problem solving. But today, our guests are simply too good not to share. So we want to welcome all of you to our first ever Foresight U, that is a public offering, a public webinar. The guest list got so big that we actually had to upgrade our Zoom capacity. So if there are any technical glitches, please bear with us. We're getting used to this new format. And we are really delighted today to welcome our guests, Gerard Puccio and Pam Szalay. They are the co-authors of the new Talent Development at Work guide called Cultivate Creative Thinking for the Future of Work. You might ask, what qualifies someone to write a guide like that? Well, get ready for it. Pam Szalay has a Master of Science in Creativity and Change Leadership. She is currently a learning and development consultant, coach, and facilitator of online courses for Cornell University's eCornell classes. And Dr. Gerard Puccio is a distinguished professor at the State University of New York, chair of the Center for Applied Imagination at Buffalo State, where he has been the chair for decades, although you really wouldn't know to look at his youthful appearance. He is also the author of more than 70 articles, chapters, and books on creative thinking. Actually, his research laid the foundation for the foresight theory that we use, which has helped tens of thousands of teams tackle tough challenges with creative thinking and strategic collaboration. Um, so here's our agenda today. Gerard will start with an overview of their new guide that talks about how to cultivate creative thinking, and then Pam will jump in with some fascinating insights on how to use AI to enhance and extend our creative thinking. Then I've got some questions for the two of them, and Russ will relay your questions from the chat. So we can all ask Pam and Gerard our burning questions about how to cultivate creative thinking to help us solve the tough challenges ahead. Um, Gerard, without further delay, let me stop sharing and I will turn this over to you.
Well, thank you, Sarah. I aspire to be as eloquent as you. So thanks for that lovely introduction. Let me get another shot of whiskey.
Russ, can you meanwhile maybe take our images and leave
Oh,
just
yeah, I will.
Gerard on the screen?
So just to make sure we're all going in the same direction, so this is the Foresight U webinar on the secret to solving the challenges ahead, which is based on the guidebook that Pam and I wrote for ATD as part of their Talent Development at Work series. So, Sarah, thank you so much for having us. I've lost count of the number of Foresight U's I have participated in. You have thrown a challenge our way. So not only will we be talking about the guidebook, but we'll be solving a challenge in terms of the audience. What a remarkable show of interest. Thank you all for being here. And our challenge is to share information with a group that represents a range of expertise from master's degrees in creativity, as I looked at the attendee list, to individuals who are new to the field. So for those of you that are masters or practicing professionals for many years in the field of creativity, my invitation to you is that as we go through some of the fundamentals, that you try to look at this in a new way. There'll be information certainly that you've heard before, but perhaps there'll be some nuances that will add to your knowledge base. I know every time I teach and train, I always get new insights. So though I've been in the field, and Sarah was very kind to say for many decades, it's now been 35 years at Buffalo State. What I try to bring to every presentation is a growth mindset myself. So we're here to talk about the guidebook, as Sarah mentioned. We are going to start by providing a little bit of context. So when we talked about the structure for this webinar, we had thought about this as an interactive, engaging Q&A, which it will be, but in order to ask informed questions, especially for those of you who are new to the field and the subject, there's a little bit of information that you need to have. So the structure for this opening will evolve around three elements. First, the context for the guidebook, then the 6 applied creative thinking strategies that we featured in the guidebook aimed at supporting learning and development professionals and trainers as a, if you will, a foundational set of what we know are proven strategies for promoting creative thinking skills. Then I will hand it over to Pam, who will go into an example of an artificial intelligence AI exercise that we built into the guidebook. So first, let's talk about the reason for the guidebook. So many years ago, Pam and I wrote some blogs for ATD. Someone had filed that in their memories at ATD, and kind of looking at the tea leaves and the future of the workplace, we were asked to write a guidebook that would provide some foundational skills and tips and strategies that would support trainers and professionals in learning and development, because ATD, like many of us, are looking at this changing landscape in the workplace. The slide that you see now is one example of this in terms of trying to cast what is necessary for success in the workplace for professionals and for organizations to navigate an increasingly complex, unpredictable world. This comes from the World Economic Forum, their report, jobs report that came out in January, looking at the skills that will be necessary, predicted to increase in importance over the next 5 years. Not a big surprise, AI and big data, number one. But if you quickly move down that list, you see creative thinking as the fourth most important skill that will continue to grow in importance. However, what's really interesting to me is when you look at this list, and I'm sure ATD was familiar with these kinds of reports, thus the reason why we were asked to write this guidebook. You see resiliency, flexibility, agility, curiosity, lifelong learning. These are all characteristics of a creative mind. So what sort of helped us to frame the guidebook, the guide to the guidebook? Having been in the field of creativity now for 35 years, well, at Buffalo State and a few years prior to that, we use good research, my familiarity and Pam's familiarity with the research into the efficacy of creativity training. So what works best? What are the best practices in the area of helping others to learn and to develop their creative capacity? Well, number one, from a meta-analytic study done of 70-some creativity training programs, mainly with adults, one of the keys to success is that creativity training, if you're going to help others to learn and develop and enhance their capacity to engage in creative thinking, to use their imagination deliberately to solve complex problems, and don't all of us solve complex problems at work and frankly in life in general. What lends support to the most successful programs is to have that learning and development experience rooted in cognitive models, models that teach thinking, models that provide individuals with repeatable methodologies. Foresight is one example of that as a creative problem-solving process. And in fact, in this meta-analytical study, they concluded that creative problem solving, foresight, you see an example here, foresight, clarify, ideate, develop, and implement. Creative problem solving was identified as one of the most effective cognitive models for promoting creative thinking. Secondly, as we designed the guidebook, one of the things that best practices says that learners need to apply these strategies immediately after learning them. So in the guidebook, we introduce a strategy. It's immediately followed with an exercise so that the learner isn't just reading over various steps. The best way to develop, like any field, any area of endeavor, the best way to develop expertise and to become a master is through practice, right? So immediate practice. And then third, in each of the six, or for each of the six guidelines, strategies that we provide, we include a team practice, because in the workplace, more and more, of course, we are collaborating to solve wicked problems. We're collaborating to apply our creative thinking to solve complex problems. And therefore, each of the strategies includes some tips for how to use that strategy in teams. So how a individual can bring the tool or the strategy to a team, or how a professional who is in the area of learning and development can deploy that strategy in teams. So that's the guide to the guide. So Gerard, what are the six strategies? Thank you for asking. So these are, if you will, fundamental, good, basic, proven, time and time again to be useful cognitive strategies that have been proven to enhance creative thinking and creative problem solving. Foundational strategy is what we call diverge first. In each step of the creative problem solving process, you will see a diamond shape for clarify, ideate, develop, and implement. I'll focus in on this and highlight two forms of thinking that occur throughout the creative problem solving process. And in many ways, this is the key to effective creative thinking, which many of us really don't learn. We go to school and there's an assumption that we learn how to be good thinkers, but we don't spend a lot of time looking at the mechanisms of how the brain operates. And there are two basic ways in which the brain can operate. One, we can think divergently, which is to begin at a certain point and then expand our thinking laterally out from that point. So it's thinking in diverse ways. And then the second fundamental way in which our brain can operate is to think convergently, where we begin to narrow down, select, evaluate, think of it as critical thinking. So again, divergent thinking is getting outside of what is familiar to us by thinking laterally. And often we stop our thinking short and we remain only in this area of familiarity. Because when you look at a list of ideas, for example, when you've been presented with a problem, always what you think of first, of course, are the things that you've already thought of, what's familiar to you. And when you're posed a complex problem or a wicked problem or a problem that requires a novel solution, we need to learn how to get outside of this area of familiarity and into new areas of discovery. And many of us haven't been trained how to separate those two forms of thinking, which when used simultaneously, as they often are, for example, in meetings where you're there to solve a problem, someone may go to share an idea and then it's evaluated immediately. Someone's diverging, someone immediately begins to converge. That's a very ineffective way of engaging in thinking. In fact, it destroys all the momentum that's happening in that setting. So that is a foundational skill. We move from there to the second guideline or second strategy. So now we are moving from a general strategy. specifically into the clarify, getting into the stages of creative problem solving. We have one strategy for each stage of creative problem solving so that the learner or the L&D professional has a full menu of strategies to pull from. So solving the right problems, we share a strategy, I should say, because if you don't define the problem properly, all of the thinking that occurs afterwards is going to be off target. So we share a strategy for how to ensure you are, in fact, working on the best framing of the problem. Third guideline now moves into the ideate step. So once we have clarified the problem, how do we ensure we're really maximizing the deployment of our imagination? What are some principles that can help to ensure that you have truly moved beyond the first ideas that occur to you and get into more original thinking? Again, when you analyze a list of ideas for their originality, it's always the ideas that come at the end of our thought process that are the most original. So from there, we move from ideate into taking an idea and transforming it into a workable solution. Within the guidebook, there are some job aids that are provided, as in a worksheet that moves you through and facilitates you, if you will, through the tools that we share related to each of these strategies. In the develop step, we introduce a tool called Point. This is one of my favorite tools. It's a tool that can be broadly applied. It's a 4-step strategy where you identify first what are the strengths or pluses, what are the opportunities in the idea that you're considering. So here you're looking downstream, you're looking into the future. Often we'll sometimes do a simple pros and cons, and we don't really project into the future and ask ourselves, what are the possibilities and the potentials that might flow from this idea if we pursue it. Then, of course, we have to apply good critical thinking and consider the shortcomings in an idea before we run out and execute. So here we pose, we frame, I should say, obstacles in the form of creative questions that can then be answered. So what are the issues that will get in the way of the success of this idea? What are the shortcomings in this idea? These are framed in how might language so that we can then consider solutions for those issues. And in that way, we employ the ideas that look most workable into our new thinking, and we refine the idea from a good idea to a great solution. Great all-purpose tool. We wanted to make sure that this was included as a job aid within the guidebook, because this can be used not only for evaluating ideas, but it can be used to evaluate the performance of a team. It can be used to extract lessons learned after closing out a project. It can be used as a leader as a way of providing a direct report feedback. So a great all-purpose tool. Next, we move to the implement step of the creative problem solving process. If you're selling something that's a bit novel, sometimes where the greatest creative thinking is necessary is in the implementation step, where you're trying to get others to come on board. And here we present a strategy called stakeholder analysis. So let me clear that. We'll move to our final guideline, or strategy, I should say, which is incubate, and borrowing from our day-to-day experiences, many of us would quickly identify where we often get our breakthrough ideas, that light bulb moment. It's not when we're directly working on the problem, but when we're engaged in an unrelated activity. We now know better from neuroscience what facilitates good incubation. So we talk about this in the guidebook. Incubation works best after having a deep level of preparation, into the problem that you're working on. It's shifting over to a low cognitively demanding task, moving from trying to solve a wicked problem to diffusing a bomb is not a low cognitively demanding task. You have to be very much focused on diffusing that bomb. Your mind can't wander. So tasks that are familiar to you or routine are the most likely to promote incubation. Doing something unrelated to the problem that you're working on allows your mind to wander more, gets you into literally a different thought space. And then finally, making this a habit. The more that you build incubation time into the day, the more it becomes a cue to your mind to engage in incubation. So these are the 6 strategies that we outline in the guide. Again, they're presented both from the perspective of an individual learner to make these useful for themselves and how they can develop their skills, as well as for L&D, learning development professionals, as well as trainers, to take these to deploy them into their organizations. And with that, I'm going to wrap up my segment, my overview, and I think at this point I'm turning it over to Russ to see if there were any questions that came up from those in the audience.
Thanks, Gerard. Thanks for the 6 strategies. There's just one question that came up when you shared your first strategy around diverging, converging. It was phrased, and I'll just read it as it is. So are we saying that convergent thinking is helpful after we've determined a root cause? Convergent thinking can be helpful with improving the root cause of the issue? Question mark.
So as an introduction, I kind of skipped through this very, very quickly. So divergence and convergence happens in every step of the process. So when we're in Clarify, we do engage in divergent thinking. This is sort of a misnomer of divergent thinking. It only happens when we're exploring ideas. But looking for root causes, like fishbone diagram, is a way of diverging. And then afterwards, you begin to focus in on, well, what is the key? What is the root cause to this situation? So divergence and convergence happens in every step of the process. But I will say, based on the research that we've done, most groups are not trained in how to separate divergent and convergent thinking. That's why this is foundational. This is a foundational skill. And if a group knows how to and can simply separate divergence from convergence and cue in others, especially when in meetings, that this is what we're doing. We're engaging in divergent thinking. Now we're shifting into convergent thinking. You can immediately make meetings, for example, much more functional, and your own thinking much more functional.
Great. We have one more hot off the press related to your last tip. Any tips for making incubation a habit?
Absolutely. So there's a wonderful book. Curry wrote it. I don't know if it's double R, but it's Currey or Curey, called Daily Practices. I think that's the name of the book. I may not be remembering it accurately, but if you look at eminent creators, I know it's difficult in a fast-moving world to build this in, but daily walks, or when you're get up in the morning, creating a ritual for yourself so that it becomes something that is small. You start small first, right? And as you engage in that practice more and more, find something that works for you, something that's intrinsically interesting to you. It's more likely to become a daily habit. So that may be one of the keys, is to find something that you find naturally rewarding.
If I might jump in too, there
Yeah, go
is
ahead.
quite an extensive bit in the book itself that talks about how you can use and develop with AI additional ways to learn how to incubate, to find those opportunities in your life where you're not thinking too hard and could have some mind wandering happen. So it's in the book.
Great. And then this will be the last question, and then we'll turn it over to Pam. Another one came in. You mentioned best options come at the end Could you explain? I may not be using the correct word you use, but when you're diverging, very often the best options come towards the end.
Yeah, so this is something that has been demonstrated over and over again in research. In fact, going back to Sid Parnes and some of the early research that he did in collaboration with Alex Osborne, Osborne being the inventor of brainstorming and the originator of creative problem solving, Sid Parnes coming along later and becoming a colleague to Alex Osborne, Sid being the founder of our department at Buffalo State. When you take you pose a problem to a participant and you ask them to generate ideas for that problem, you can then evaluate those ideas based on the sample of individuals, a comparison group. And the ideas that individuals tend to generate at first are ideas that everybody's generated. So they're not uncommon, they're unoriginal. But as people learn to engage in divergent thinking and the more they extend their thinking, the more they get into original ideas because they've exhausted already what they've thought of, what's already familiar to them, which pushes them into these new areas of discovery. And they're, yeah, in a way, they're statistically infrequent ideas because when you compare them to a pool of other individuals, they're uncommon.
Great. Thanks so much, Gerard.
You're welcome.
We have another one or two we'll hold for our Q&A towards the end, but I'm going to go ahead and suggest we turn over to Pam.
You're muted, Pam.
All right, can you see a screen with a robot?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, well, hello everyone. It's nice to be in the fray here. So my time here in this presentation is about focusing a bit on how you can use AI to help you with creative process. And the way we approach this in the book, because there's the 6 strategies that Gerard just reviewed, we know that a lot of people reading the book are new to creative problem solving. And we also know that AI is new to all of us. So we tried to be very detailed in our instructions. In fact, I wanted to be more detailed, but there's only so much you can put into a short book. So I'm just going to kind of hit the highlights of why we took this approach and then like a philosophy of how you want to approach AI and creative problem solving together. And then I'll give you an example and we'll go from there. So the picture I chose here is very intentional. And you really can't see, unfortunately, that behind that one box, but there's 2 robots, or maybe there's a person and a robot, and they're shaking hands. And I'm trying to convey this is a partnership. So we are not just letting AI out and go around and solve this problem, but you are going to be in partnership with AI. So it's not a wind-up toy. This is something that you're going to be propelling yourself. So you want to stay engaged throughout the process. You don't walk away from your screen and let AI do its calculations. You're going to stay right there step by step. And so, for example, if your intuition kicks in, you can insert that into the process. AI doesn't know what's in your mind yet, anyway. So we are going to stay engaged, and that is probably my main point here. So we have a lot of detail in our 6 examples in the book. There's no magic without you. So this is a 3-way thing. We have AI on the one hand, that's a tool, digital tool. We have creative problem solving, another tool that is scientifically based. It's been proven. There's a bit more about that in the book, and like Gerard said. However, you need to be in there as well. So we're going to be staying in the driver's seat as I've sort of described. So what does that look like? Well, one of the reasons for that is that there is AI needs specific prompts, and we can't assume it knows what we're about to do. Creative problem solving needs specific prompts. And there's all kinds of wrong information on the internet. I don't know how many times you might have asked AI to do something. And if you're an expert in a field and you ask AI about something in your field, you'll notice some very strange answers at times. It doesn't know the difference between what an expert wrote on the in the internet and what a bunch of people who are blogging who maybe didn't know as much wrote, and it gets out there, right? So we want to make sure we're using the scientific process that we know works when we're doing this this integration and this partnership. So of the 6 strategies, we can't really have time to do them all. So I'm going to focus on diverge first, which is very fundamental, and that will carry over, the skill will carry over into the other tools. So first, we're going to begin with identifying a challenge. Actually, somebody just asked a question about that, like finding the root cause, and we talked a bit about clarifying and framing the problem. So you're going to have that done. I've got my problem that I want to solve, and you're going to state it. You're going to tell AI what it is, and you're also going to want to provide some background information because it doesn't know. Unless it's been following you and you've been writing all these things down as you go in your computer, it doesn't know. So you have to give it some background information, maybe some solutions you've already tried. You could upload a document to give it more background information. And you could also give AI the ideal outcome. Like, it would be really great if this solution could accomplish X, Y, Z. So that's how you get started, right? You're going to frame your problem. You don't want to just say, hey, AI, give me 30 ideas. Give it this context. Then when you're ready to diverge, you still need to give it a little more assistance on how to diverge, because it doesn't know what the guidelines for divergent thinking are, for example, or if it does, or if it looks online, it might not find the ones that we are advocating. So you're going to basically say, when I diverge AI, when I'm about to look at a bunch of ideas, I want you to help me produce a bunch of ideas. And I don't want you to evaluate them in any way. I just want a whole bunch of ideas. So you're going to suspend judgment as a person. When you diverge, you're supposed to suspend judgment. You're going to go for quantity. That sort of goes without saying, right? We're going to get a lot of ideas, but you can tell AI, I want 50 ideas, for example. You also want to say that you're okay with novelty. So the rules for divergent thinking are, I'm not sticking to familiar. I'm not sticking to safe. Like Gerard showed in that description, we're moving away from the familiar towards things that are new and different. And sometimes new and different is the first thing we want to reject, of course. That's the point of learning how to be a better problem solver and creative problem solver, is being open to novelty. So you're saying, AI, we're okay with novelty. And it's okay to make connections. You can combine ideas. You can kind of bring something in that seems unrelated to craft a new idea and make a connection to the problem I have. And then you go ahead and tell how many ideas you want. This is a lot of prep, isn't it? So we haven't even gotten ideas yet, and we've done all this thinking and all of this facilitating. So I see. Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to give you my example. Let me save the example. So once we have a whole bunch of ideas, then you will need to converge and select the best ones. And that's, I am going to jump ahead and go to my example just so you can see what I'm talking about before we select ideas. So my example that I used for real, I facilitate live sessions, and I do feedback on assignments for students that take micro-credentials at Cornell University for their micro-credential program, eCornell. And so in a very short time, I have to go through a whole bunch of assignments, and people are more likely to use AI, of course, because the tool is very available. We do allow students to use AI because it can refine their answers, but we certainly want the students to think themselves, to digest the material themselves. And sometimes I am very, very suspicious of what shows up in my discussion boards, especially when if I type it into AI and I get a certain response and I see 5 students with very similar responses. So you start to learn that there's some bits and tricks to it, but it was really taking me a long time sometimes to really think about, I don't know, I'm suspicious. I don't want to accuse somebody of something, but I also want to try to have them learn from this process, not just spit out information at me. So I told AI that this is what I've noticed. There's some generic answers coming in, that I have protocols. Cornell has certain things that I'm allowed to say and not allowed to say to students about this. And I would really love it if I could quickly assess if something's authentic or not, and then be able to give that student unbiased feedback. So that was where I was coming from. And I threw it into AI, gave it the guidelines for divergent thinking. I said, give me 25 ideas. And it did. So here are my 25 ideas that AI gave me. And honestly, I was a little overwhelmed by this. It was fabulous, but it was a lot of information. And I mean, it went into things that I didn't know and had to go look up. So there was a lot of information here. And I thought, as I started going through, well, first I celebrated, yay, there's solutions to my problem. But that's a lot, a lot of these aren't actually realized quickly, they won't all work. What's the problem? Well, some of them will take too much time. Some of them will take an investment, things like that. So I'm like, I think I need to sort this a little bit more. So then I asked AI to take my 25 ideas and try to provide a little more, some patterns for me. So it dropped them into buckets. I asked it, can you please group these together? Like, what patterns do you see? Can you show me what patterns are in all of these ideas? And it gave me these buckets. And I was able to look through these buckets. And actually, I realized pretty quickly that only about two of them were going to be something that I could implement. That's still a lot of ideas. And I want them, so I have the power to choose, but I also want to narrow down to pick one that I can execute, right? So we have the power of many ideas, and then we have the power of choice to decide, how do I want to move forward? So what I did was, I'm like, I need some criteria. So you can tell AI, this is how I need to sort these ideas. I mean, there's a lot. So AI, I can't do anything that's too time consuming. Tell it. I can't invest in new technology. So I need a solution that's going to be readily available. And here's the tools I have. Can you use these tools that I have? And you can tell AI what you do have. And then something I do myself, not with the team. Some of the examples here required me designing the course differently, and I'm not in charge of that, so I couldn't choose that as one of my solutions. So I had to choose things that I could personally execute. So actually that eliminated 5 groups and probably 40 ideas. And now I worked my way down. So I decided, yeah, I could drop something in that's suspicious into one of those online things where it reads it and tells you, oh yeah, that's like 85% AI, that sort of a thing. So I could use some technical tools that were free, or it may be one that my organization pays for. And I also could certainly do this last one. So when I am setting up the course and I'm meeting people, I could certainly say, listen, it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay I want to hear what you're thinking. I could encourage people. I can encourage my students to give it their best shot, to share what they think is right, and then allow me to coach them if there's anything wrong, and not to worry about it. And sometimes people are more likely to share if they're not worried about being wrong. So that's how I used AI to guide me through this convergence, and then, I'm sorry, this divergence, and then this convergence. From there, I actually asked it to, can you combine those 10, all the little um, the sub solutions, you might say, that were in here. And I asked it to combine it into a solution for me, which it did. This is a lot to read. I'm not going to read it, but it put it into one major solution for me. I'm like, wow, that's really great. Like, I didn't have to write that, but it makes sense. It made sense of all the data for me. And then finally, I decided, you know what? As much as I am delighted that I have someplace to go, I realized that very much from the beginning, I really didn't give AI enough information. So in this case, what I decided to do, and you can do this too, you can decide, I need more ideas, and I actually need to frame the problem a little better and a little differently. So I decided I'm not going to do this with you now, but you could do this if you don't have quite the right ideas that you wanted. You just go back and fine tune it a little more. So I told AI, well, I need an online environment to consider, and I only need solutions that are about evaluation and assessment. And then I went forward from there, and I was able to narrow it down to something that I could implement in my courses. So that's my example of how to use AI. And of course, I shared my philosophy of why I took that approach. So I'd be open to any questions that you have.
All right, thank you, Pam. Um, just a couple questions came in. Uh, I'll read the whole comment in the end as the question. This is great. I love that you're telling the system to suspend judgment. Hold on. Interesting regarding novelty. Why the emphasis on the amount of ideas for divergent thinking?
I think that's a great question. I will see if Gerard wants to pop in, but what they've learned over time through research is that the number of ideas, the larger the ideas, the more likely you're going to find the novel idea and the quality. So, as he said, the first few ideas that we come up with tend to be familiar. I've done this with actually groups to show them. I will have groups in a room, maybe 5 groups, and I say, everybody generate as many ideas as you can on XYZ. Um, the first 20 ideas of these groups are almost exactly the same sometimes. I'll have 5 teams generating ideas, like name all the types of ways you could modify a car. And the first 20 ideas are almost identical. And they're always blown away by that. And then you push for 30 ideas, 40, 50, you start to get some unusual ideas after that. And that's why the quality comes from the quantity. That's why we ask for that.
Yeah, great. Uh, Scott asked, do you upload your boundary conditions and constraints as a separate instance within AI?
You absolutely could. I have one of the examples I have of incubation in the book is basically saying you could, if you want to find time to have mind wandering, let AI know what your job is, upload your resume, upload your job description, tell AI what you're doing. And from there, AI might say, oh, yeah, I did this with it because I'm a musician and I threw some things in. And it told me, oh, yeah, you could mind wander while you're wrapping chords up after a gig. I'm like, oh, I never really thought about that. That's a very tedious, boring thing to do. So it will come up with unusual things based on what you give it. So yes, if you have a comprehensive document that explains your problem, explains background information, anything like that, feed that in. You can upload it usually as some document. Does that help?
Yeah, that's great. And then maybe one more, and this is specific, let's say, to AI, but also without AI. How do you prime your colleagues or committee members to be divergent and go through this process with AI or with you leading them? I'd like to mitigate resistance to the ideation process.
That is an incredible question. It's actually a very deep well. I feel like I want to hand this over to Gerard, if you're comfortable with that.
Oh, sure, sure. No, so that's a great question. There are several approaches. One thing that comes to mind immediately is most folks haven't been oriented to the distinction between divergence and convergent thinking. So sharing the the benefits of being able to separate these two forms of thinking. So first of all, calling them out, saying we all do this. What I often will do is point to a pain point, like have you ever been in an unproductive meeting? And everybody has. Well, one of the things that happens in an unproductive meeting is that these two forms of thinking will get commingled. And in such a meeting, when an idea is shared and then it's immediately criticized, what's your experience? What happens in that meeting? And most folks will say, well, all of the thinking just immediately dries up, or people become uncomfortable. Only the bold will speak out. So connect with a pain point. So that's one way to kind of sell in the value of separating divergence and convergence and the benefit of divergent thinking. And then the other is a little bit of quick training, a warm up. Have some fun with it. Do something out of context first before going into the real issue that's close to home, where it's easy to judge. Apply divergent thinking to something fun and light, debrief it, talk about what the benefit was of that, how the experience went, and then say, great, That's what we want to do here on something real. So that would be my recommendation.
Fabulous. And then back to you, Pam, for one final. Does quantity matter as much for AI generation versus kind of generating, with humans?
I think it does, because again, it's only going to the power of AI, right? It's you can get 1,000 ideas if you want to. And actually, there's some things about extending when you're asking AI to diverge, you can get an incredible number of perspectives. So you have the people in your room. If you're facilitating in person, you're going to get their perspectives. With I could say, let's pretend there's an engineer here. What ideas would the engineer bring us? You could say, if Abraham Lincoln was here, what ideas would he bring us? So you're going to be able to get perspectives when you work with AI. So the quantity is, again, it's just going to push out to more and more novelty, to more and more different ways of looking at a problem. So you need a lot of idea, or actually, I think you want to take advantage of that opportunity with AI. So it's not that it's not an either or, you just want a lot of ideas either way.
Great. Right. We'll hold the remaining comments, questions to the end. So if you want to connect with Gerard and Pam, there's their info. We'll also send it out as part of the follow-up to this with the recording. We wanted to use a few more minutes, and I'm going to go ahead and ask Pam if you can stop sharing, and we will add Sarah back to the mix. And if I can figure it out, take myself off.
You're
Sarah's
good.
got a few
You
questions
can stay
for
here,
you.
Russ, because you'll have
Yeah.
questions, I'm sure. So, switching to Gerard, you talked initially about the importance of a cognitive framework when you're cultivating creative thinking. And can you talk more about, well, and I happen to know that you actually developed a psychometric scale based on that cognitive framework. Can you talk a little bit about why that's important and how it affects creative collaboration?
Absolutely. So I'm going to share because I think seeing a visual will really help to tell the story. So to your point, Sarah, one of the areas of focus that I've had is this interest in terms of, yes, I train creative problem solving and I know the efficacy of creative problem solving. I know that these are skills that can be developed. Also, as a psychologist, and especially one who has studied individual differences and variation within people, how people think differently, something that's called cognitive styles in the literature, it made me curious as to whether creative problem solving as a cognitive model, as a way of thinking, a thinking system, if humans, individuals, have different degrees of preference and comfort with this framework. So in other words, we all carry it inside of us. We know we can train and develop it, but do we already have particular biases, if you will, or areas that we have a lot of energy for and come more naturally to us? And what I'm sharing here, many of you are familiar with Foresight, the self-assessment tool. This is the profile for those who are not familiar with Foresight. So it's taking that model, clarify, ideate, develop, and implement, and in 36 self-report questions, as individuals respond to these 36 questions, it will end up mapping out your creative problem solving, or if you will, Foresight profile. So you see Pam's profile compared to my profile. So if you look at Pam's profile, you see she has high preferences for clarify, ideate, and develop, and a low preference for implement. Doesn't mean she can't implement. It just means where she prefers to spend her energy is on the front end of the process, which when you compare it to me, and this is one of the reasons why I think we're such good collaborators, turns out that clarify and ideate Our low preferences for me, you're a professor of creativity, your low preference is ideate. Yes, it is. And in fact, that's what drew me to the field of creativity, because I could then learn cognitive strategies that would help me, because I tend to quickly move to the back end of the process in terms of developing solutions and then moving them out into the world, bringing them to reality. So in this way, we are excellent collaborators when it comes to our professional work together. Pam and I are also life partners, and this can also help us immensely in our personal relationship as well, because it develops a better understanding for the kinds of things that we might engage in, behaviors that we might engage in that otherwise we might be quick to judge. Like, why are you asking me so many questions? Or why, when we're getting ready to go on a trip together, do you need to know all the details? That kind of thing. So I tend to move much more quickly to action. Pam can help to counterbalance that, and it really contributes a lot to our collaboration. And as Sarah, you and Russ know full well, this is hugely beneficial for teams to understand as they think about their collaboration, so they can communicate more effectively together, so that they better understand and appreciate differences. Because whether we recognize it or not, these differences exist. What the foresight measure helps teams to do is to make this visible. And once it's visible, you can work more effectively with this information.
Thanks, Gerard. That's awesome. And I know that you teach an amazing graduate program that takes people months and years to complete. But for a team in an organization, like how much time do you have to invest in teaching creative thinking for there to be really a payoff, for there to be a notable benefit? I
Yeah,
know really they should all go to your program and get a
yeah,
degree,
well,
but in case they didn't.
yeah, absolutely. Of course, the more time that you can dedicate to learning, creative problem solving, and the strategies and facilitation, and the many other important concepts related to creative leadership, the more effective you can be. But even a short couple of hour training, especially taking something as fundamental as learning how to separate divergence and convergence, learning how to effectively engage in divergent thinking, that can happen very quickly. And frankly, in fact, just introducing the concepts to teams. We did a research study with 117 groups working on a real problem. In some cases, we didn't do training. We simply introduced how to separate divergence and convergence. And in a 50-minute period, they were able to be much more productive as a result of being introduced to that framework and working within that framework. So it can be as simple as an introduction.
That's really helpful. Um, Russ, do you have questions from the group? Because I'm looking at timing and we don't have a ton of time. Are there, I don't mean to filibuster on questions. Are there questions coming from the group that we should pass along?
I think there are two that might be most relevant. One was going back to the incubation. Um, and the question, if I can find it, was in the gist was how do you promote incubation among a team as opposed to individuals?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, field trips are wonderful. Ensuring that teams are taking breaks during the day. In terms of the field trip, I said that quickly, but we have had master's projects within our degree program, Buffalo State. I'm thinking of Anthony Bellani's master's project in particular, where he took individuals on a field trip to an art gallery. So they had a real problem they were working on. Let's go on a field trip. Don't necessarily be thinking consciously about the problem. Take in the art, allow your mind to wander. Then they came back afterwards and they reflected on their experience and then intentionally took the experience and asked themselves, well, what did you see or observe that might, as an analogy, or might be an area that could serve as a springboard for some new thinking. So yeah, you can build in breaks, build in field trips. Food is always fun, of course. There are lots of ways that you can ensure that you're creating incubation time.
Great. And there's one more. It's a little bit of a long question, but it touches on AI as well. So someone wrote, we were recently approached by a well-known school known for its specialization in developing creative students. They had a specific concern that students were using AI to design products and services that may be needed in the future. But the faculty were saying that the students were producing too near-term um, products and services. So I'm going to jump. And there was a concern that they were outsourcing their divergent skills to AI. Any thoughts on how we might use the 6 strategies to reinvest in students' ability to dream or imagine the future? So I like dropping
That's a
that
great,
on both of you at 1:56 Central.
yeah, yeah. So my quick response to that, given the fact that we only have a few minutes left, is AI, in order to work with AI, just as if you're working with a team member on your team and you're a leader, the more skillful you are at facilitating others' thinking, in other words, the more you understand creative process, the more you can create prompts that are appropriate, the better you'll be able to interact with AI. So rather than diminishing the importance of learning deliberate creative methodologies, it becomes even more important because now you have this device that you're interacting with. I'll give you an example. Just came from a meeting over lunch. We're working on a grant to develop creative problem solving bots. And AI has a tendency, when you ask it for ideas, it actually has a tendency to give you solutions, not ideas. It tends to give you very actionable, more solution or so near term. So if you don't know the process, you don't recognize the difference between an idea or a solution. And you can't facilitate that as an example. So it in fact makes learning creative problem solving more important so that you can interact knowledgeably, that you're a more skillful facilitator of AI. So
That's
Oh, I
great.
think we
Thank
should
you.
close it there. That was great. That was really great and sort of sums up both what Pam has shared about using AI and what you've shared from the long history. But we really are in a new world of AI engaging with our own creative thinking. And I love that you all have ventured into it and produced a guide that brings the classic information, what we know about how to teach creative thinking, and blends it with what we don't exactly, what we're just learning about AI. That was really masterfully done in your guide. We did post in chat the link to purchase the guide. We asked ATD if we could have free copies for you all, but they said that would not really work out. But it's worth purchase. If you're an ATD member, you can get the PDF for free. I have read this guide. I know a lot. I too have a degree in this, and I found the guide very helpful. So let me wrap by just saying thank you all for joining our first ever public Foresight U. We will send everyone who registered this recording and the slides and some key links to help you follow up whether your interest in creative thinking is to bring it to your organization, to bring it into your own life, or to pursue an academic degree, which we all highly recommend. Thank you, Pam and Gerard. That was a
thank you.
terrific hour of insight.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks for the opportunity.
Mhm.
Thanks,
Great
everyone.
pleasure. Signing off. Bye.